Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. Last week I talked a little bit about NPCs, more specifically how to make stats for them, and in what situations you don't actually need to. This week it's NPC personality, and I'd like to think that I have quite a bit to say about that, so let's learn something. First up, before I even get into ways to make your NPCs interesting or characterize them over the table, let's talk a little bit about where to begin, because that can be hard too. So where can you begin? Well, if you don't already have a concept in mind, the Player's Handbook and DM's Guide are good places to start. You can look into the personality trait, ideal, bond, and flaw tables for any class, make up your own traits, go to the tables in the non-player character section of the DM's Guide, or any combination of the above. Also, one of the tricks that I use in making NPC personalities is starting with the story. I like to see what kind of NPCs I need, and what kind of NPCs will be interesting, and build from there. For example, maybe I need a scientist. If that's the case, I start thinking about what kinds of personalities may fit that archetype. And quick spoiler, they all do. You may want a very objective and expressive scientist or a hyperactive goofball, and both of these cliches can be fun, but try mixing and matching personalities with NPCs. And that's another thing. You may not expect a scientist character to be incredibly charismatic, but that's just not the case. And obviously, this might not seem like a lot to go off of, and that's because it's not. It's just a place to start. I also like to think about what role they'll play in the story and how they'll interact with other people. When running a prison break arc, for example, by the way, I have 2 whole videos and a story all about that if you're curious, you may want to guard 2 opposed players. Ask yourself why. Are they just doing their job? Do they have a grudge against the players? Are they working for someone opposed to the players? Are they just grumpy? Why? And you can keep asking yourself questions like this on down the line to see where this goes. You can also do the same thing that I mentioned before with personality traits here with how they interact. Try to intentionally make parts of NPCs' personalities that don't match the images of them that you might have cliches of in your head. Maybe the guard is really nice. Why? And then you can start asking yourself questions from there. So, to summarize, find a place to start by building off the story, or world, or whatever, and make the NPCs that you will need. And you'll be surprised at just how much inspiration it will give you. Then, start giving them traits. The books can provide good inspiration for this. Also, try to go against your own gut and create diverse NPCs with more personality than you might have expected starting out. All too often, we get caught up in patterns that only limit our creativity, and finally, start asking yourself questions and you can build from there. Now that we have the basis for an NPC, we can finally start having a little bit of fun and start talking about how to make them interesting, engaging, and unique. I already mentioned it a little bit before. I already said that going against your gut is a good way to help yourself generate ideas, but it also helps you to generate interesting NPCs. Just think about it. Not every rogue is going to be some shady criminal. Not every bard is a musician, and the same goes for your NPCs. I already mentioned asking yourself questions, but one of the hidden uses of asking yourself questions comes down to giving your NPCs motivation. Why is one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself here. Why did they become a soldier? Why did they run away from home? Chances are that by this point you already have a few ideas, so go from there, go from each one and ask yourself these questions. You'll start generating new ideas, and if you get stuck, just go to one of your other ideas and build off from there. Chances are you'll answer your question that you had before, and the more you do this, the more you'll realize you're kind of starting to build up a backstory. For tips on making a good backstory, I'll direct you to my video on how to make a good character backstory, because a lot of that applies here, just not necessarily to the same extent. For NPCs, you really only need enough to account for the things they'll do and the decisions they'll make. After all, the point of making a backstory is to have a place to build off of when designing your NPC motivations. So a paragraph or so will probably suffice. You don't have to go crazy with it if you don't want to. And for one more point about making NPCs interesting, I like to make a point that I made in my video on character backstories, and that is introduce a little bit of complexity. Most of your NPCs shouldn't be completely good or bad or straightforward. You might have an NPC who's super cynical and judgmental, but really has a strong sense of compassion and donates regularly to a local orphanage. On the other hand, you might have an NPC who has devoted their life to medicine and is really an established physician, but gambles for the money away. Now, I'm not saying make all of your NPCs super dark and great. It can even be as simple as giving a battle-hardened soldier a soft spot for cute animals. It doesn't take a lot, but it goes a long way. But that's it for making NPCs. What about characterizing them over the table? Well, you're not done planning yet. Remember those questions that I had you ask yourself earlier? Well, there's a reason why I included how they interact with people in that list. It'll really come into play here. You should even ask yourself about their mannerisms and general behavior as well. For example, what do they do when they're afraid? What are they afraid of? How do they handle complex social encounters? Do they hate being around people or do they love it? And the more you do this, the more you'll get a clear image of them. And speaking of a clear image, what do they look like? You'll be surprised at just how many details you can get across about them with just a simple description. If they work in some kind of manual labor job, might they have cuts and bruises from working long hours? What about their hygiene? Are they a clean person? Are they disheveled? And what about their fashion sense? And the list goes on. When doing this, it often helps to write down a brief description ahead of time so that you can pull from that when DMing. It doesn't have to be perfect or incredibly detailed, just a few points. And if you've done what I've said so far, you already have this for their traits. Keep these things somewhere close by so that you can can pull from them if you need to while you're running the game. And in terms of playing the game, you don't have to do silly voices. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. Not everyone can, and that's okay. Honestly, myself, I have a hard time doing voices over the table, so don't worry about it. You can actually just describe how they're talking. For example, maybe the innkeeper has a very gruff voice. You can just say that. Maybe the merchant yelps their words and they get excited. You can just say that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Instead, one of the tricks that I like to do is I like to put on a show with my posture, the way I'm sitting. I may throw my hands out or talk with my hands. I may slouch forward, put my arms on the table. I might sit straight with perfect posture if I'm describing a noble or something. There's a lot you can do with just a display without necessarily having to do lots of voices. And to generate these more expressive details, for example, voice if you want to do voices, or just hand gestures if you're more like me, just look at their personality traits that you already gave them. Are they very excitable? Maybe they move in quick bursts. Are they slow and lethargic? Maybe they don't gesture a whole lot. And that is where I'm going to end today's episode. Thank you all for watching, and I hope this little overview of how to give your NPCs a little bit of personality was helpful. Be sure to watch this week's other video. It's all about Vin Kent, a character I played a while back, and feel free to come back next week where I'll release a couple of shorter episodes all about the classic "it's what my character would do" argument, and tell the final story of how the first campaign that I ever started pulling stories from on this channel ended. So until then, let's learn something.